In this video, we're going to touch base on the 3D annotation of welds, the 3D weld symbols, as well as view representations to help the welds show up. And we'll also get into the IDWs, or the 2D prints, utilizing the weld environment. So the first thing we want to do is set up some view representations. And with those, we typically create three. The first one is default, and what default is basically the way the part's going to look when it's on the final machine. So we typically color code everything the way we want it at the next level assemblies, or the whole way up the tree. So that's basically what default is. We show the welds, we do not show any symbols. Then the second one we create is welds, which is most of what we've seen when we do the welds itself. Really makes the welds pop, makes it easy to see both on the 3D model as well as on the 2D print when we get to that. But they're just two custom appearances, and we use what's called annotation contrast, which is basically a white. It's pretty much out of the box white from Inventor. And then we also create one that's the welds, or the annotation, and that is just this pink magenta color. But in this welds view representation, we do show the welds, and we also do show the weld annotations. We don't have any here yet, but we will get into creating those. Then the last view representation we create, or view rep as we call it, is one with no welds. And pretty much the reason for this is to save some video crunching power. We're not creating the extra surfaces of the welds, and then as well as when we're shaded, not showing the weld bead texture. So it's basically to lighten up the model, especially when you get it in large assemblies. And we also utilize it on IDW when we're actually putting the dimensions to show locations of parts. So when we go to the IDW now, have one here with a few pre-populated views. Typically when we create a views, this is what it would look like. But now that we're in the weld environment, we want to utilize some of those view reps we made. But the first thing to do, which you can set this in the templates, there's this model states tab. So what this does is, the mindset behind it was to be able to turn preparations on and off, welds on and off, machining on and off. And we pretty much use view reps to control that. We don't use these features. You do have to have it set to welds, so the welds do show up where you want them, but we actually let the view representations actually control the visibility of the welds. So if you do have welds in a model and they do not show up, you need to come into this model state tab and click welds. So the first thing we typically do, most of our weld symbols in the ISO view, or make multiple ISO views to get the point across, because it's easier to see where the welds really belong in an ISO view as opposed to an ortho view. So we typically shade it in, and then the view rep, here we're going to go in and grab welds. And you can see here's where the annotation contrast color scheme we do really makes it pop in that view. And the other reason we use these colors is because if this gets printed off on a black and white printer, if you have, say, a green parts and the pink weld, it's going to look like it's black on black or dark on dark, and it's really hard to see it. So that's why we choose the lighter color for the parts, and then the pink for the weld itself. Now, in terms of these other welds, other views, sorry, the ortho view here, we have the weld shown, and you can see that weld really clutters up this drawing. So what is that guy? What do we really want a dimension to? And we want a dimension to that square bar that's in there. So that's where we come in, and we will change those view reps to no welds. So we do all our dimensioning in the orthos with the no welds view rep. And you can have these style off of the parent as well. And you can actually pick that when you generate the welds too, so you don't have to come back and do this.
So now we have clear, clean views to dimension to and show dimensions to, and we know what to pick. We don't have to won't have the chance of accidentally picking a weld. So now we will get into the actual weld annotations themselves. So when we go ahead and create the weld, we're going to create that fillet weld on the end of this part again. And note this option right here, create welding symbol. So we can go ahead and create that welding symbol as we're creating the weld bead. Now you do have the option to link it to the current bead, which is really nice, really awesome, except there's one issue. We do all our welds in fractional. We call them out 1/4 inch welds, 3/8 welds. When you link this, even if you put in 1/4 inch up here in the weld, it'll show 1/4 inch, but when it actually enters it, it switches it to decimal. That is one thing you cannot change, and that's a big wish item for us. So we don't link it. So I'll go ahead and get out of that, undo it. Let's do it again. Face, face, face. Second set. Create welding symbol. We just do it manually. So what it does is it creates that symbol. Now, what's kind of cool is that symbol kind of rotates so you can see it even when you rotate the model. But also, as you can see, sometimes it gets in the model. So you'll want to tweak that a little bit. And the easiest way to tweak that is to do it when you're in an ortho. Oops, sorry. Or perpendicular. And pull that guy out there. It will always take the tail and swing it to the left, which is a bit of a wish. But it's not the end of the world, because when you actually rotate the part and look at it, then it's in the right place. So always pull your welds outside of the parts, and like I said, the best way to do that is to take an ortho shot of it, and even a better way to do that is probably to do it so that the weld is on the left side of the part, or the symbol, weld symbol is on the left side of the part. And as I mentioned earlier, sometimes you can't model the leg the way you want them to. We want to make sure we get some sort of representation in there. So this is where the instance where a weld, actually we called out a 1/4 inch weld, but it actually got modeled at like a 0.16 something. This is where we go in and make sure that we put the annotation on to clarify what size that weld truly is. Now you also can use the 3D annotations, or what used to be model-based definitions. So we're going to get out of the weld environment here, and we're just going to go into the annotation environment of an IM, which all IMs now have it. So what we're going to do is just go in and create a leader text. And we're going to pick that edge right there. And there's the leader it's creating. And we're just going to say no weld beyond this face. So if you need to put a special note on a file about controlling the welds, you can do just that. And note that you can pull it around. Again, getting into the orthos probably helps. And that way you can call out certain aspects or places that, bring attention to certain places in your model. So once we get our symbols and annotations on there, now we can go back to the IDW. And notice nothing shows up yet. Well, that's because we have to right click on the view, go down and get model annotations, and get the welding symbol. So there's the welding symbol, and we can manipulate and put them wherever we want. And you can also go in and get weld annotations. So if there's any other annotations that you may have put on that, you have that option as well.
And you can also retrieve the model annotations. So that would be the don't weld beyond this face note. And note that that didn't pop in here too well. So this is the instance where we would actually create another ISO view so that that note could be clearer, so we can get the full point across. Now it's just not right bringing it in at that view, as you can see. But again, you can take those and manipulate them to wherever you want them to be. One other thing I'll note, if you do find that getting the annotations is kind of clunky and you still want to annotate manually here with your weld symbols, keep in mind they won't be linked to the model. So now you'll have three places to possibly modify them. You'll have within the weld itself, you have to modify the weld, and if your leg lengths don't match, then you'll have to modify the 3D annotation of the weld symbol in the model, and then you would also have to manually update this one at all. So my recommendation is to not manually do welds here if you're creating them on the 3D model. But if you are manually still feel you want to do it that way, one cool part about this is that when you're creating that, if you do the 3D model annotation, which I highly recommend, if nothing else, you can flip back to the model, the IAM, see the weld symbol, it's 1/4. You don't have to go in and edit it to get that weld size. You can just flip back here, and then you can flip back. Oh, my apologies. You can flip back to the IDW and then type in your value for the manually created one. But again, highly recommend doing it on the 3D model, and even more so not just for the IDW, but going forward, we feel pretty strongly that 3D annotations or model-based definitions is where a lot of things are going to end up once the viewing technology kind of catches up to things. So you would be ready for that situation, you know, if 3D annotations do evolve and 2D prints kind of go away, you'll have your models prepared to do that. And that concludes our video on the 3D annotations, 3D weld symbols, and also getting them onto the 2D environment of the IDW.